The stars had been peaceful for thousands of years. The Galactic Council kept order across hundreds of worlds, and war was almost forgotten. Then the darkness came. Ambassador Velthar stood in the Grand Council chamber, his forearms shaking. He had just received the worst news possible. 3 entire star systems had gone silent. No distress calls, no survivors, nothing. When scout ships finally arrived to investigate, they found empty worlds stripped of all life. The cities were gone, the oceans were dry, and even the atmosphere had been consumed. The enemy called themselves the Krithak Swarm. They came from the empty space between galaxies, traveling in massive living ships that looked like insects made of metal and flesh. They did not want to talk or negotiate. They only wanted to consume everything in their path. Every world they touched became a dead rock floating in space. Council leader Morpheus, an ancient being who had lived for 500 years, called an emergency meeting. Representatives from every member species gathered in the chamber. The mood was dark. Their military forces had fought the swarm 3 times, and 3 times they had been crushed. The swarm's numbers seemed endless. For every ship destroyed, 10 more appeared. "We need help," Morpheus announced to the shocked council. "Our forces are not enough. We must look beyond our borders." The idea was radical and dangerous. The council had rules against contacting primitive civilizations. These species were supposed to develop on their own until they were ready to join galactic society. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Velthar was given the task of searching the databases. He needed to find a pre-contact species that might have military strength beyond their technology level. The computer searched through thousands of planets looking for specific traits. High-gravity worlds were preferred because species from such planets would be naturally stronger. Hostile environments were good because they produced tough survivors. Most importantly, he searched for species with a history of warfare. The search took 3 days. Finally, one planet appeared on the screen that met all the criteria. The planet was called Earth by its inhabitants, though the official galactic designation was Sol 3. The dominant species called themselves humans. Velthar studied the data with growing concern. Earth was classified as a death world, a rare category of planet where survival was extremely difficult. The gravity was 30% higher than galactic standard, which meant humans had evolved to be much stronger than typical civilized species. The planet was covered in violent weather patterns, earthquakes, volcanoes, and deadly predators. Most council species would die within days on such a world. But what truly worried Velthar was humanity's history. The humans had been fighting each other since they discovered fire. Their entire civilization was built on competition and conflict. They had developed thousands of different weapons, from simple clubs to nuclear bombs capable of destroying entire cities. In their most recent global conflict, over 70 million humans had died. Instead of learning peace, they had built even more weapons. The humans had nearly destroyed themselves dozens of times. They had created diseases, poisons, and weapons so terrible that they had agreed to ban them, yet kept the knowledge to make more. Their planet was divided into nearly 200 different nations, and these nations were constantly competing for resources and power. "This species is dangerous," Velthar warned Morpheus. "They are not like us. They do not value peace and harmony. They know only conflict." Morpheus looked at the data for a long time. He saw images of human cities, massive structures made of steel and concrete. He saw their primitive spacecraft, barely capable of reaching their own moon. He saw their weapons designed for one purpose: killing other humans as efficiently as possible. "That is exactly what we need," Morpheus finally said. "Send the message." Velthar composed a simple transmission in mathematics, the universal language. It would take the humans time to decode it, but they were intelligent enough to figure it out. The message was broadcast from the most powerful transmitter the Council possessed, aimed directly at Earth's solar system. The message was simple and direct. "We are the Galactic Council. We are at war. We need warriors. Will you answer our call?" The signal traveled through space at the speed of light. It would take years to reach Earth, but the Council had faster-than-light communication. They sent the message through a relay network, and it arrived at Earth in just 3 hours. On Earth, in a remote facility hidden deep underground, a technician named Jake Morrison was working the night shift. He monitored radio signals from space, mostly looking for natural phenomena like pulsars and quasars. It was usually boring work. Nothing ever happened during the night shift. Then his equipment started screaming alerts. A signal was coming from outside the solar system, and it was artificial. Jake's hands shook as he started recording. The signal was complex, clearly intelligent, and it was repeating. He ran it through the translation software, expecting random noise. Instead, he got words. Jake dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, but he did not notice. He was reading the message over and over, unable to believe what he was seeing. Aliens. Real aliens. And they were asking for help. He grabbed his phone and called his supervisor. Then he called the military. Within 1 hour, the message had reached the Pentagon. Within 3 hours, every government on Earth knew about it. Within 6 hours, the President of the United States was in an emergency meeting with leaders from China, Russia, Europe, and dozens of other nations. For the first time in human history, the nations of Earth agreed on something. They would answer the call. The response was sent back through the same channels. It was written by a team of linguists, diplomats, and military leaders. The message was carefully worded but clear. We are humanity. We have received your message. We are coming. Tell us where to meet you, and we will bring what you need. When Velthar received the response, he felt a chill run through his body. The humans had answered faster than expected. They had not asked about payment or safety. They had not requested more information. They had simply agreed to come and fight. He forwarded the message to Morpheus with a note attached. They are coming. I hope we have made the right choice. I fear we may have awakened something that cannot be controlled. Morpheus read the response and smiled, though it was a sad smile. We asked for warriors, old friend. We are about to discover what that truly means. The Council sent coordinates for a meeting point in neutral space, halfway between their territory and Earth's solar system. They would send a diplomatic ship to make formal contact and explain the situation. What they did not know was that humanity was already preparing for war. Every nation on Earth was contributing resources. Factories were being converted to produce weapons. Scientists were working on new technologies. Volunteers were signing up by the millions. Earth had been contacted by aliens, and those aliens needed warriors. Humanity was about to show the galaxy what a species born on a death world could do when they decided to fight. The Council had asked for help, but they were about to learn a hard lesson. When you wake a sleeping predator, you cannot control what happens next. 3 months had passed since Earth received the alien message. In that time, humanity had worked with focus and speed that surprised even themselves. The nations that had fought each other for centuries now worked together with one goal: prepare for war among the stars. The alien ship appeared in Earth's orbit exactly when promised. It was called the Harmony, a diplomatic vessel that looked like a silver egg covered in glowing blue lights. The ship was beautiful and elegant, designed for peace and negotiation. It was nothing like what the humans had expected a warship to look like. Ambassador Velthar stood in the landing bay of his ship, waiting to meet the human delegation. He had spent the past 3 months studying everything the Council had learned about humanity. The more he learned, the more worried he became. These creatures were born predators, evolved from hunters who had climbed to the top of their world's food chain by being more dangerous than everything else. The human shuttle docked with the Harmony, and the airlock opened. Velthar's first sight of actual humans made him take a step backward. They moved with smooth, controlled grace that reminded him of the great cats that hunted on his homeworld. Their eyes faced forward, the mark of a predator species. When the leader smiled at him, showing her teeth, Velthar had to remind himself it was a friendly gesture. General Kate Sullivan led the human delegation. She was tall by human standards, with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. Beside her stood Admiral Ryan Clark, commander of Earth's hastily assembled space fleet. Behind them came a dozen military officers and scientists, all watching the aliens with intense curiosity. Ambassador Velthar, Sullivan said, extending her hand. Thank you for coming to Earth. We're ready to help. Velthar carefully shook her hand, noting how strong her grip was. Even in the reduced gravity of his ship, the humans moved easily. On their own world, they lived under crushing pressure that would tire most Council species within hours. Thank you for answering our call, Velthar replied. Though I must confess we are uncertain what to expect from your people. Sullivan's smile did not quite reach her eyes. You asked for warriors, Ambassador. Let us show you what that means. The first meeting took place in the Harmony's main conference room. Velthar and his team presented everything they knew about the swarm. Holographic displays showed destroyed worlds, battles lost, and the steady advance of the enemy toward Council space. The presentation took 2 hours. The humans watched in complete silence, their faces revealing nothing. When the presentation ended, Sullivan asked a single question. "Show us your military tactics and battle records." What followed was deeply uncomfortable for Velthar. The humans watched recordings of Council fleet battles against the swarm. After each battle, they asked questions that made Velthar realize how poorly his people had been fighting. Commander Lisa Grant, a human tactical officer, pointed at one battle. "Your ships retreated when they still had 60% combat capability." "Why?" "We had taken casualties," Velthar explained. "It is our practice to withdraw and preserve lives when possible." "But the enemy was weakened too," Grant continued. "You could have won if you had pressed the attack. Instead, you let them regroup." Captain Dan Morris reviewed another battle recording. "Your weapons are designed to disable enemy ships, not destroy them." "You're trying to capture them?" "We follow the Accord of Harmonious Conflict," Velthar said. "Unnecessary destruction is considered barbaric. We try to minimize casualties on both sides." The humans looked at each other. Sullivan leaned forward, her expression serious. "Ambassador, with respect, you're not fighting a war. You're fighting like this is a disagreement between civilized neighbors. The swarm doesn't care about your accords or your rules. They want to eat you. We cannot simply abandon thousands of years of civilization and culture," Velthar protested. Admiral Clark spoke for the first time. "You can keep your civilization or you can win this war. You probably cannot do both. That's the choice you need to make." The assessment phase lasted 2 weeks. Human military analysts worked around the clock, studying every piece of data the Council provided. Dr. Helen Park, a biologist specializing in extreme life forms, made several important discoveries about the swarm's biology. She found weaknesses in their hive structure that could be exploited. The Council scientists had never looked for such weaknesses because their military doctrine did not include targeting biological vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, the Celestian delegation learned about human warfare. Velthar requested access to human historical records, and what he found terrified him. Humans had been fighting wars for their entire existence. They had developed the concept of total war, where entire nations mobilized every resource for combat. They had created weapons capable of destroying their own planet and had come frighteningly close to using them. One evening, Velthar sat with Sullivan in the observation deck, watching Earth rotate slowly below them. The planet looked beautiful and peaceful from space, with blue oceans and white clouds. It was hard to believe such a violent species had evolved there. "Your people frighten me," Velthar admitted. "You speak of death and destruction so casually. You plan for scenarios where millions die and consider it acceptable." Sullivan was quiet for a moment. "We don't consider it acceptable, Ambassador. We consider it reality. Life on Earth is hard. We evolved surrounded by things trying to kill us. Predators, diseases, weather, even each other. We learned to fight or die. That's not something we chose. It's what we are." "But you could choose peace now," Velthar said. "Your world is united for the first time. You could build something better." "We are building something better," Sullivan replied. "We're building a future where we don't get eaten by the swarm. Peace is wonderful, Ambassador. But peace only exists when someone is willing to fight for it." The final assessment meeting included representatives from both species. The humans presented their analysis and recommendations. The list was long and harsh. The Council needed to change everything about how they fought. Their ships needed heavier weapons. Their tactics needed to be more aggressive. They needed to accept casualties as the price of victory. Velthar listened to the recommendations with a sinking feeling. Everything the humans suggested violated Council principles, but he also knew they were right. The Council's way of fighting had failed. They were losing the war. "If we follow your recommendations," Velthar asked, "what are our chances of victory?" Sullivan did not hesitate. "With our help, about 60%. Without our help, 0. The swarm will consume every world in Council space within 2 years. And if we win, what will it cost?" "Everything you're willing to pay," Sullivan said quietly. "War doesn't care about what you want to keep. It takes what it takes." Velthar sent an encrypted message back to Morpheus and the Council. He explained everything the humans had found and recommended. He also included a warning. These beings are not like us. They do not fight wars to gain territory or resources. They fight to win at any cost. If we accept their help, we must be prepared for what they will do. The Council's response came back within hours. The swarm had broken through another defensive line. 2 more worlds had fallen. The Council had no choice. They needed humanity's help no matter how uncomfortable it made them. Bring them, Morpheus ordered. Bring your Deathworlders to war. The human fleet gathered in Earth's orbit, and the sight of it made Velthar understand just how different these beings truly were. 47 warships hung in space like predators waiting to strike. They were not beautiful like Council vessels. They were brutal and efficient, covered in armor plating and weapons. The flagship was named Defiance, a name that reflected human attitudes perfectly. Admiral Clark commanded from the bridge, with General Sullivan coordinating ground forces. The crew came from every nation on Earth: Americans, Chinese, Russians, Europeans, Africans, all working together for the first time in history. They were volunteers who knew they might never return home. Velthar had been assigned to travel with the human fleet as an observer and liaison. He stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching the crew prepare for departure. They moved with purpose and discipline, checking weapons systems and running combat drills. What disturbed him most was their attitude. They seemed excited, almost eager for battle. The journey to the war front took 3 weeks. During that time, Velthar observed human behavior closely. They trained constantly, running combat simulations that would give any civilized species nightmares. The scenarios included situations where 90% of the crew died, and they practiced how to keep fighting anyway. They also sang songs. Velthar found this particularly strange. The songs were about war, death, and glory. They sang about fallen comrades and last stands against impossible odds. One popular song was called "We Are Coming Home," about soldiers who knew they would die but fought anyway. When the humans sang it, they smiled. Lieutenant Commander Ben Hughes, who led the Marine boarding teams, tried to explain it to Velthar one day. "We sing because it helps us remember why we fight. Those songs are about people who gave everything to protect others. They inspire us to do the same." "But you sing about death so casually," Velthar said. "Death isn't casual to us," Hughes replied. "We just accept it as part of life. Everyone dies eventually. What matters is what you do before that happens." When they arrived at the war front near the Helix Nebula, the situation was desperate. The Council fleet was in full retreat. 12 capital ships were being torn apart by millions of swarm attack craft. The smaller Council vessels were trying to protect the capitals but were overwhelmed. Ships were dying and thousands of Council personnel with them. Admiral Clark studied the tactical display with cold efficiency. The swarm had formed a massive sphere around the Council fleet, attacking from all directions. It was a textbook encirclement, and the Council forces were being systematically destroyed. "All human vessels," Clark's voice rang across the fleet channel. "Execute Protocol Apocalypse." Velthar did not know what that meant, but he was about to find out. The human fleet did not slow down or try to flank the enemy. They accelerated directly into the swarm formation at maximum speed. "Are you insane?" Velthar shouted. "You will be surrounded and destroyed." Sullivan looked at him calmly. "That's the idea, Ambassador. Watch and learn." The human ships crashed into the swarm formation like hammers. Their weapons opened fire simultaneously, and space lit up with the fury of human warfare. Nuclear missiles streaked toward swarm vessels, each warhead powerful enough to destroy a small moon. Railguns fired solid metal slugs at incredible speeds, punching through swarm ships like paper. But the real shock came from the close-range weapons. As swarm vessels closed in, human ships deployed plasma cannons and particle beams at point-blank range. The weapons were devastating, but required the human ships to be dangerously close to the enemy. Council doctrine said to maintain distance. Human doctrine said to get close enough to make every shot count. The swarm had never faced an enemy that fought like this. They surrounded the human ships, expecting them to panic and retreat. Instead, the humans fought harder. Ships that took critical damage did not withdraw. They rammed into swarm vessels, setting off their reactors in suicide attacks that took dozens of enemy ships with them. Velthar watched in horror as the human destroyer Phoenix took fatal damage to its engines. Instead of abandoning ship, the captain ordered all power to weapons and flew directly into a swarm cluster. The resulting explosion destroyed 47 enemy vessels. Why? Velthar whispered. Why would they do that? Because it needed to be done, Sullivan replied quietly. Every swarm ship we destroy here is one that will not attack the Council worlds. Captain Rodriguez and his crew just saved thousands of lives. The battle raged for 6 hours. The swarm threw everything they had at the human fleet, and the humans refused to break. When swarm boarding craft latched onto human ships, they found something unexpected. Human Marines met them at every breach point, fighting in conditions that would kill most species. The Marines wore powered armor that augmented their already considerable strength. They carried weapons that fired explosive rounds, plasma bursts, and even simple bullets accelerated to extreme velocities. When swarm creatures broke through into the ship corridors, the humans fought them hand-to-hand if necessary. Lieutenant Commander Hughes led a boarding defense on the Defiance itself. 12 swarm creatures, each the size of a small vehicle, breached the lower decks. Hughes and his team met them with flamethrowers, explosives, and absolute determination. When his weapon ran dry, Hughes grabbed a piece of broken pipe and kept fighting. The swarm had evolved to fight species that valued individual survival above all else. They had never encountered beings who would rather die fighting than surrender. They had never faced humans. After 6 hours, something unprecedented happened. The swarm withdrew. For the first time since the war began, they retreated from a battle they had not won. The remaining swarm vessels broke off their attack and fled into deep space. The surviving Council ships watched in stunned silence. They had been minutes away from complete destruction, and the humans had saved them. But the cost was terrible. 8 human ships were gone, destroyed in the fighting. Over 3,000 human personnel had died. The human fleet regrouped, their remaining ships battered but still operational. Medical teams worked frantically to save the wounded. Engineering crews patched holes and repaired damaged systems. And on every ship, the crews mourned their dead while preparing for the next battle. Admiral Clark sent a message to the Council fleet. This is Admiral Ryan Clark of the Earth United Fleet. The immediate threat has been neutralized. We are standing by to provide assistance to your damaged vessels. The Council Fleet Commander, Admiral Torren, responded with obvious emotion in his voice. Admiral Clark, we owe you our lives. Your people fought with courage beyond anything we have ever witnessed. But your losses are terrible. We are so sorry. They died protecting others, Clark replied. There is no better reason to die. We will honor them by continuing the mission. When can we expect the next swarm attack? Velthar listened to this exchange and finally understood what humanity truly was. They were not monsters or barbarians. They were survivors from a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. They had learned that the only way to survive was to be tougher, meaner, and more determined than anything else in existence. The Council had asked for warriors. They had received something far more dangerous. They had awakened Deathworlders who fought not because they wanted to, but because they refused to lose. And now that they were awake, the galaxy would never be the same. The war changed after humanity's first battle. News of the human victory spread across Council space faster than their ships could travel. For the first time since the swarm appeared, the Council species felt something they had not felt in months: hope. General Sullivan established a joint command center on Arcturus Prime, the Council's most heavily defended fortress world. The planet was protected by thousands of defense platforms and 3 full battle fleets. It was also home to the Council's military academy, where officers from dozens of species learned the art of civilized warfare. Sullivan's arrival changed everything about how that academy operated. She brought with her a team of human military instructors who began teaching Council officers the reality of total war. The classes were brutal and uncomfortable. Many Council officers dropped out in the first week, unable to handle human methods. Fleet Marshal Torren, commander of the Council's Northern Defensive Line, attended one of these classes. He was a veteran of 2 centuries of peacekeeping operations and considered himself an expert in military matters. What he saw in the human training sessions shocked him to his core. The humans used simulations where there were no good choices, only less terrible ones. Officers had to decide whether to sacrifice 1 ship to save 3, or risk all 4 trying to save everyone. They practiced fighting when outnumbered 10 to 1. They learned how to keep troops fighting even when defeat seemed certain. After one particularly harsh simulation, Torren confronted Sullivan in her office. Your methods are barbaric, he said angrily. You treat lives like numbers on a spreadsheet. You sacrifice personnel as if they mean nothing. Sullivan looked at him with tired eyes. She had not slept properly in days, coordinating operations across a dozen star systems. Marshal, we value life just as much as you do. Maybe more because we understand how easily it can be lost. The difference is that we value victory more. Every person we lose now is a world full of people we save later. That is the math of survival. There must be another way, Torin insisted. Show me, Sullivan replied. Show me how to fight the swarm without casualties. Show me how to win a war by being gentle and kind. If you can figure that out, I will gladly listen. But until then, we fight with the tools we have. And the best tool we have is the willingness to pay the price for victory. While the military trained, Dr. Helen Park and her research team made a crucial breakthrough. Working with council scientists, they had identified the swarm's command structure. The massive bioships that led each swarm fleet were not just carriers. They were neural hubs that coordinated millions of smaller attack craft. Destroy enough of these hubs and the swarm would become disorganized and vulnerable. The problem was reaching them. The command ships stayed at the center of swarm formations, protected by layers of smaller vessels. Any direct attack would be suicide. The Council had tried 3 times, and 3 times their fleets had been destroyed before getting close. The solution came from Lieutenant Gary Chen, a fighter pilot who had lost his arm during the first battle. He could not fly anymore, so he had transferred to strategic planning. His idea was simple but radical. Use automated drone ships packed with antimatter warheads. Send them in first to clear a path, then follow with manned vessels to finish the job. It violates the Treaty of Automated Warfare, Velthar protested when he heard the plan. Using autonomous weapons is banned by Council law. It is considered too dangerous. Your laws were written for a different kind of war, Sullivan replied. The swarm does not care about your treaties. Adapt or die, Ambassador. Those are your only choices. The Council debated for 2 weeks. Some members argued that using such weapons would make them no better than the swarm. Others pointed out that losing the war would make such debates meaningless. Finally, Morpheus made the decision. They would use the human plan. 6 months after first contact, the combined fleet launched its first major offensive. 200 ships, half human and half Council vessels, gathered for an assault on the Kepler Rift. Intelligence reported that 15 swarm command ships were gathering there, preparing for a massive push toward the Council's core worlds. The battle plan was complex. Human ships would form the front line, smashing through the outer swarm defenses with overwhelming firepower. Council vessels would provide covering fire and electronic warfare support, jamming swarm communications. Then the automated drones would push through to the command ships. The fleet arrived at the Kepler Rift and found the swarm waiting. Millions of attack craft formed defensive screens around the command ships. The battle began immediately, and it was every bit as terrible as expected. Human ships took the brunt of the initial attack. The destroyer Vengeance lost its entire port side to swarm fire but kept fighting. The cruiser Determination had its bridge destroyed, so command shifted to engineering and they fought on. The battleship Indomitable took so much damage that the captain ordered a controlled reactor breach, turning his dying ship into a weapon that cleared a hole in the swarm lines. Behind the human ships, Council vessels followed the new tactical doctrines they had learned. Instead of maintaining safe distances, they moved in closer. Instead of trying to disable enemy vessels, they targeted critical systems for maximum damage. It felt wrong to many Council officers, but it worked. Captain Nicole Reed commanded the human carrier Valiant, which launched waves of fighters to harass swarm formations. Her pilots flew with reckless courage, drawing fire away from the larger ships. When her fighters ran low on ammunition, they rammed swarm craft rather than return to the carrier. Each time it happened, Reed felt the loss deeply, but she did not order them to stop. The mission was too important. After 3 days of brutal fighting, the path was clear. The automated drones launched, their AI systems guiding them through the chaos of battle. They moved faster than any manned vessel could, weaving through swarm formations with mechanical precision. The swarm tried to stop them, but the drones were too small and too fast. When the drones reached the command ships, they detonated simultaneously. 15 antimatter explosions turned the heart of the swarm fleet into a series of miniature suns. The blast was visible from 3 light-years away. The smaller swarm vessels, suddenly cut off from their coordination network, began acting erratically. Some attacked each other, some fled in random directions. The ones that continued fighting did so without strategy or coordination. The combined fleet methodically destroyed them over the following hours. The victory was complete, but the cost was staggering. 19 human ships were gone, along with over 6,000 personnel. The Council fleet lost 12 vessels and 3,000 crew. By Council standards, it was a catastrophe. By human standards, it was an acceptable exchange. Memorial services were held on every ship. Admiral Clark spoke at the ceremony aboard the Defiance, reading the names of the fallen. It took 3 hours to read them all. Velthar stood beside General Sullivan, watching her face remain expressionless throughout. When the ceremony ended, Velthar saw Sullivan's shoulders shake for just a moment before she regained control. He followed her to the observation deck where she stood alone, looking out at the stars. "You feel their loss," Velthar said quietly. "Every single one," Sullivan replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Every name, every face. I remember them all. Captain Rodriguez, who rammed the swarm cluster. Lieutenant Hayes, who held the breach point on the Manchester until the hull ruptured. Commander Foster, who got his crew to safety before his ship exploded. I remember all of them." "Then why do you continue?" Velthar asked. "Why do you send people to die?" Sullivan turned to face him, and Velthar saw tears on her face. "Because if we are going to send people to die, we are damn well going to make sure it accomplishes something. Those 6,000 people saved millions of Council citizens. That is what matters. That is what they died for. And I will carry their names for the rest of my life so that their sacrifice is never forgotten." The galaxy was learning that humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their tactics. It was their willingness to pay any price for survival, and their refusal to let those payments be meaningless. 1 year after first contact, the war had reached its critical point. The combined human and Council forces had pushed the swarm back across dozens of star systems. Worlds that had been lost were reclaimed, though they would take decades to recover. The swarm's advance had been stopped, then reversed. But intelligence reports brought troubling news. The swarm was not retreating randomly. They were falling back to the dark zone, a region of space so filled with radiation and stellar debris that conventional sensors barely worked. Something was happening there, and it made Admiral Clark nervous. The Council wanted to establish a blockade and wait. Let the swarm hide in the dark zone while they rebuilt their forces and fortified their borders. It was the safe, logical choice. General Sullivan argued against it with every fiber of her being. "We cannot give them time," she insisted during a heated Council session. "Every day we wait is a day they use to prepare. We need to finish this now while we have momentum. Your species has lost 12,000 personnel," Morpheus countered. "The Council has lost 8,000. How many more must die before you are satisfied?" "How many people live in Council space?" Sullivan shot back. 3 trillion, 4? If we stop now, the swarm will come back stronger. How many of those trillions are you willing to sacrifice? Because you were too afraid to finish the fight. The debate continued for weeks until reconnaissance drones brought back data that changed everything. Deep in the heart of the dark zone, the swarm was building something massive. The structure was kilometers across, made of the same biometal as their ships. Energy readings suggested it was some kind of portal generator. Dr. Park analyzed the data and delivered her conclusions to the Council. If that portal activates, it will connect to wherever the swarm originally came from. Everything we have fought, every victory we have won will be meaningless. We will face not millions of swarm vessels, but billions. The vote was unanimous. They would attack. The final assault fleet was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. 300 warships from 12 different species, with humanity providing nearly half. Human carriers launched thousands of fighters. Automated weapons platforms moved in formation like a mechanical swarm. Every weapon, every soldier, every resource available was committed to this one battle. Admiral Clark stood on the bridge of the Defiance, now scarred from a year of constant combat. General Sullivan stood beside him along with Velthar, who had requested to be present for what he called the moment that will define the future of the galaxy. The fleet entered the dark zone, navigating through fields of radiation and debris that would have stopped any vessel just 2 years earlier. Human engineers had developed new shielding technology, sharing it freely with Council species. That cooperation, born from shared struggle, had made them all stronger. The swarm was waiting. As the fleet approached the portal structure, millions of attack craft emerged from hiding. The battle began instantly. A swirling chaos of ships and weapons fire. The Dark Zone's interference made long-range targeting nearly impossible, forcing everything into close-quarters combat. Human ships formed protective screens around Council vessels, taking the brunt of enemy fire. The cruiser Liberty lost all engines but continued firing its weapons until it was torn apart. The destroyer Hope rammed a swarm capital ship, buying time for others to advance. The carrier Justice launched its last fighters, then moved forward to engage with its point defense weapons. In the center of the battle, Lieutenant Commander Ben Hughes led a boarding operation that defied all reason. 50 human Marines in powered armor, supported by 200 Council soldiers from 6 different species, landed directly on the portal structure itself. Their mission was to reach the structure's core and plant antimatter charges. The interior of the portal was a nightmare of organic corridors and hostile creatures. The swarm threw everything at the boarding team trying to stop them. Hughes and his Marines fought through room after room, corridor after corridor. Half the team died in the first hour. A quarter more in the second. Hughes himself took a hit that shattered his armor's left side. He kept moving, using one arm to fire his weapon while the other hung useless. Behind him, Council soldiers who had once thought humans were barbaric now fought with the same desperate courage. Inspired by the example set before them, they reached the core with only 19 personnel left. The antimatter charges were set. Hughes ordered everyone to evacuate while he stayed behind to ensure detonation. The remaining team refused to leave him. "We started this together," said one Council soldier, a Celestian named Korth. "We finish it together." Back in space, the fleet fought with everything they had. Council ships that would have retreated a year ago now pressed forward, refusing to yield. They had learned from humanity that survival sometimes required sacrifice. Admiral Torren, once critical of human methods, commanded his battle group with aggressive tactics that would have shocked his younger self. Admiral Clark watched the tactical display, counting down the seconds until the charges detonated. The fleet was taking terrible losses. 20 ships gone, then 30, then 40. But they held the line. They did not retreat. Detonation in 10 seconds, the tactical officer announced. "All ships prepare for shockwave." Clark opened a fleet-wide channel. "All vessels, begin withdrawal. Get to safe distance, now." The fleet turned and accelerated away from the portal structure. The swarm, sensing victory, pursued. Then the charges detonated. The explosion was beyond anything predicted. The portal structure did not just collapse. It created a temporary singularity that pulled in everything nearby. Thousands of swarm vessels were consumed in seconds. The portal itself imploded, creating a blast wave that rippled across the Dark Zone. When the sensors cleared, the portal was gone. The swarm fleet was shattered, only scattered remnants remaining. Those survivors fled in all directions, cut off from coordination and reinforcement. The war was over. The aftermath was bittersweet. Humanity had lost 32 ships in the final battle, along with 4,000 personnel. The Council lost 41 ships and 6,000 crew. Lieutenant Commander Hughes and his entire team were gone, their sacrifice ensuring the charges detonated properly. But the swarm was broken. Over the following months, cleanup operations hunted down the scattered remnants. Worlds that had been consumed were slowly reclaimed. The galaxy began to rebuild. 3 months after the final battle, a ceremony was held on Earth. Council leader Morpheus himself attended, the first galactic leader to set foot on the human homeworld. He stood before the assembled nations and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "We asked for warriors," Morpheus said, his voice carrying to billions of viewers across the galaxy. "We thought we understood what that meant. We were wrong. You did not just fight for us. You taught us how to fight for ourselves. You showed us that survival requires sacrifice, that peace must sometimes be bought with blood. You came from a world that should have destroyed you, yet it made you stronger than we could imagine." General Sullivan responded for humanity. She stood at the podium, flanked by Admiral Clark and the surviving human commanders. Behind them, a memorial wall displayed the names of all 12,000 humans who had died in the war. "You asked for help," Sullivan said simply. "We gave you what we had. That is what people do. We did not fight because we are violent or because we enjoy war. We fought because standing aside while others suffer is not in our nature. If that makes us Deathworlders, then we accept the title with pride." Later, as the Celestian delegation prepared to depart, Velthar stood with Sullivan overlooking the memorial. 12,000 names etched in stone, each one representing a life given in service to strangers from distant stars. I was terrified when I first met your species, Velthar admitted. Part of me still is. Good, Sullivan replied. We terrify ourselves sometimes. That is why we have rules, laws, and each other to keep us honest. You did not awaken monsters, Ambassador. You reminded us why we keep the monster on a leash. We know what we are capable of, and that knowledge makes us careful. And if the galaxy needs you again, Sullivan was quiet for a long moment, looking at the names on the wall. Then God help whoever made that necessary. We have paid the price for peace once. We will pay it again if we must. But we will never forget what it costs. As the Celestian ships departed Earth, Velthar looked back at the blue-green world below. It looked so peaceful from space, so beautiful. But he knew the truth now. Earth was a death world that had produced a species capable of surviving anything, even themselves. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. When you ask the Deathworlders for help, you better be prepared for what they bring to the fight. Humanity had answered the call and they had paid a terrible price for victory, but they had won. And the stars would never forget it.